Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Online Testing Options, Which is Right for You. To avoid interruptions to the presentation, all attendees are in listen-only mode. You can still ask questions, and we encourage you to do so using the Q&A box in the webinar dashboard. We will make every effort to address your questions at the end of the presentation as time allows. Today's presentation is available on the CPS HR Consulting website. We'll also forward a link to all of today's attendees once the recording is available for viewing. Our presenters today are Holly Hatada, a Senior Consultant in Test Rentals with CPS HR Consulting, and Ryan Platt, who's also a Senior Consultant in Test Rentals with CPS HR Consulting. And now, without further ado, I'll turn the presentation over to Ryan and Holly.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. Like Julie said, online testing, which is right for you. That's our information. So here's our agenda for today. I'll go over it briefly, and then we'll get started right into the topic areas we're going to be discussing today. So for our agenda, we're going to go over at the beginning some test administration considerations. We're going to start with paper and pencil considerations before we move on to the topic of the online testing, which I'm sure everyone is eager to hear more about. We're going to briefly go over the role of human proctors, and we're going to jump right into proctored computer-based testing, remote or virtual proctoring, unproctored internet testing, considerations, and then, like Julie said, we'll hopefully have time to answer some of your questions they're going to be sending into us, hopefully. Hopefully lots of questions, I bet. Okay. All right, but before we get started, we just want to go over some general testing considerations just to get everyone on the same page. I know a lot of you probably already know, but one of the things as HR professionals we're always asking ourselves is, so why is testing important? And not only just ourselves, I'm sure a lot of people are asking us, why is that important? It's important that we tell people why it's important. Well, it helps us, again, obviously assess the best candidates for the job. Being able to identify the required knowledge, skills, and abilities, and only selecting those that really do possess those knowledge, skills, and abilities in a way of determining that, which is developing a test based upon content that has been validated after the job analysis process. Again, it's important that it's objective and cost-effective, depending on what method you use. And we're talking about multiple choice written tests today, so definitely very objective. There's one right answer, and there's usually 3 wrong answers if you're doing a traditional test. And again, very cost-effective, especially if it's a large classification and you can give one test with one administration and finish your entire process, then you're definitely getting the most bang for your buck. And a lot of people I know listening in are probably either with the government or nonprofits, and you have some rules you got to follow. Usually a merit principle or other civil service rules that say that you need to only test for stuff that is required day one on the job, or only test for stuff that is job related. You don't want to have anything else. And having a nice validated examination is a way of ensuring that you are adhering to those rules and regulations. So then, of course, the question becomes, how do you choose the right tools and process for your selection procedures? Again, hopefully you have some kind of job analysis or process in place to identify that. But once you do that, you still have some options to consider. And one of those options is a multiple choice test, which is, again, the majority of what we're going to be talking about today. Not just a multiple choice test, but really how it can be implemented in the online capacity and different methods for doing that. But since we are talking about online tests, I mean, just we want to touch base with some other methods that are very common or popular in an online format that I have seen used or that we actually have used ourselves. Again, multiple choice, we're talking about that one today. Training experience evaluations, many are probably aware of those. I know in the state of California they're very big for online presence where candidates are given the opportunity to evaluate their own performance and rate how much performance they have, how much experience they have, and then those are point and rank ordered, and people are put on an eligibility list based upon that. And again, we're not here to talk about people that are different forms, but just give an idea of the universe of these different options. Supplemental applications, again, that's very similar to your training experience evaluation. The main difference being the responses are in narrative format. So you have people typing something up and probably emailing something back to your organization. And that's usually evaluated after the fact based upon set criteria. Writing proficiencies, again, this is just evaluating someone's ability to write grammar. They write, they email it in, and then it's evaluated against set criteria. And something that's actually really big, and actually we also offer through one of our vendors here, is computer simulations, where the candidate, usually online, they can actually log on and it simulates like a Word or Excel document and have them do certain tasks, and it usually gives them 2 or 3 tries to do it, and it sees how well they can perform those tasks. Again, these are just some different options. Again, we're focusing mostly on the online component today, so these are things that have been successfully implemented in the online world, either proctored or unproctored. Okay, moving right along. Again, we're going to start with additional paper and pencil just to start everybody on the same page to kind of ground ourselves in what has been done or what is commonly done, and then we're going to move in and add on to there to the discussion. So, some considerations for test administration. First and foremost, we want to make sure that our processes are standardized. And what does that typically mean? Well, it typically means that everything, to the greatest extent that we can, is going to be structured and the same experience for every candidate that comes into the process. And that starts with making sure all the forms to test that they receive are, they get the same information, the same questions, their experience coming into the place is structured and the same, and also the rules and regulations in place are the same for everybody. So, having proctor's instructions, everybody reading the same instructions, everybody experiences the same experience, so that there's no room for people saying they were treated unfairly or differently in the process. And this is important because at the end of the day, you want to compare test scores between different applicants. And to do that, you have to make sure that everybody's given the same testing experience so that they can be evaluated equally against each other. If somebody's given a much different experience and proctors in one setting are answering questions they shouldn't be answering or doing other things, all of a sudden these people have different experiences and you don't know if they're doing better because of that or because they actually know the information off the test. So it's really important to keep everything as standardized as possible. Test security, of course, that's, as you all know, making a test is not cheap. Quite expensive, especially if you're doing, the proper thing, job analysis, full test development, subject matter experts. And the last thing you want to do is to have your test on the internet a minute after you, usually after you test it, especially in a paper and pencil format where that's not the idea. You want to make sure that, those questions are secure. The biggest concern is, of course, before the test. If it gets leaked before the test, that's even a bigger concern because then you might invalidate your entire process and need to start from scratch, because if some candidates were given questions beforehand or had answers beforehand, that's definitely a situation where your test has been compromised in a way where people aren't going to be treated fairly. But anyway, you just want to make sure that your test is secure, and there's many ways to do it we'll talk about in a little bit, but really it comes down to controlling your process, controlling your test, and having procedures in place for doing that. Candidate identity, self-evident why this is important. You don't want somebody coming in taking a test and they're actually somebody else. You can very well hire somebody if you didn't have a good process in place and they get in the job and they're like, okay, for your first day, and they have no idea what they're doing because they would have actually failed the test if they had taken it themselves. So again, making sure that person is who they say they are. Usually done by checking an ID, photo ID, or depending on if it's promotional or internal, there may be different processes in place. Cheating, a very big concern, and Holly talked a lot about this when she talked about the online component where it can get even more hard to evaluate. But in a paper pencil setting, you just want to make sure that everybody comes in with no cell phone or at least there's a place to put those. Proctors are going around making sure that nobody's looking over their shoulders or staring at paper they have hidden in their shirt sleeve or the brim of their hat. And various different places. People are very water bottles.
Yeah, we've seen all kinds of different methods.
People get very creative when it comes to cheating, especially this day and age with so much technology. You're not going to stop 100% of the cheating, but at least minimize it as much as we can. So these are all very basic considerations, and a lot of these considerations are handled by our friend, the human proctor. This is the individual who is in charge of, doing a lot of these things, or ensuring a lot of things are in place. We talked about standardization, and some of that's handled by the actual form and the rules that are put in place. but all those won't mean a lot if they're not implemented appropriately. So making sure that the proctors are adhering to the rules and regulations, making sure that people are given the same standard answer when they raise a hand and ask a question. You know, they have that standard answer where, okay, we can't answer the question, we can give like clarification, and that clarification is the same, you know, what they're allowed to do. Again, verifying candidate identity, we talked about that. Really, it's just making sure that the person is who they say they are, and usually, again, it's a photo ID, and you match it, and the person can go and take the examination. But, and again, the paper and pencil format is pretty straightforward. You'll see later on that this can get a little more difficult. Different forms. Maintain and control test materials, what has to be collected at the end of the time. Of course, they shouldn't have anything else on the desk anyway, so it should be very clear that they paper that they have. Monitoring candidates to ensure no cheating. I mean, this includes the whole process, making sure that the proctors are walking through, looking at everything, making sure they're being observant, and spending equal time in all parts of the area, especially with a large or complex place. I know I've practiced some places where there's like multiple rooms or nooks and crannies and corners, and you know, you got to make sure that you always have, you know, and appropriately assign people to those different areas. In general, usually it's, you know, 1 proctor to 30 candidates, what we recommend. But that, you know, many things could alter that, including the configuration of the place. If you have a place that's difficult to use, you might want to have some extra proctors in place to take care of that. And this is not just to ensure no cheating, which of course is part of it, making sure, again, you know, they're not scratching for stuff in their pocket or anything like that, or, you know, just trying to sneak out a cell phone, text a question to somebody, or taking a picture. So just making sure that you're just monitoring everything as well as you can. And again, the last point is if something does go wrong, you are the individual, or the proctor is the individual who will be able to speak to that and explain, you know, okay, so this is what we did. And if there is an appeal or a client is saying it was done inappropriately, well, the proctor is there to say, well, this is what we did, and stand up for, you know, what the agency has done to protect the integrity of the process.
Right, and the witness as well, if there is a form of cheating happening during the administration, a witness with the proctor, so basically a second proctor, to observe that behavior and speak on behalf of that behavior is also really important. So a lot of agencies have processes in place where if there's cheating, the proctor who observes it also has a second proctor take a look, and that way it's not, you know, a one-on-one type of argument. You've got a kind of a second or third person actually there to verify what the behavior was.
Yeah, absolutely. You always, more than one is always better. All right. So now we get to move into some more, you know, I guess, current kind of information. So we're talking about the traditional paper and pencil, which a lot of places are still doing. They're still relevant. But taking a step in the direction of the future is, you know, proctored computer-based testing. So we're still having a live proctor. It's still a process that's very controlled, but instead of administering it with the traditional pencil paper Scantron, it's now on a computer, usually in a group setting, but it can be done individually, but usually, you know, for cost effectiveness, you want to do more than one at a time. Again, usually tests are installed on computers, usually on a network or the internet, so everything's connected that way. And then again, proctors perform essentially the same functions as in standard testing. Of course, there's other things that they need to consider, but they might not need to consider on the paper and pencil, like additional forms of cheating, making sure everything's locked down, no internet access, making sure, you know, there's other things that in place to protect against, you know, things that could happen in this new medium. So what are some advantages of computer-based testing? Well, we have some bullets here that go over some of the advantages. Easy content replacement. What this kind of means is that, so let's say that you are ready to administer the test, and you notice there's a typo on the page in your traditional paper and pencil setting. What are you going to do? Well, if it's major, you may have to reprint everything and delay the process. If it's minor, you might just explain to the candidate. Either way, it creates an embarrassment and or something that needs to be fixed or addressed. If everything's online and connected via the network or internet, you could easily replace a typo or some parts of the information to make it more clear or to correct and do that quickly so it affects all the tests. So again, it's almost like nothing, so they're almost, you caught it early enough, it's almost like no one would even notice that there was potential error. So that's a really nice thing to be able to do. Don't worry about, coordinating all of the paper and the printing and, noticing the last minute that your agency has an extra L or something. Yeah. The next bullet, easy to add experimental items. Experimental items, in tests like the GRE or SAT, they usually have extra items on the test. They're not scored. The candidates usually don't know this. They're just usually extra items on the test. And you can have them in paper or pencil. The nice thing about having them on a computer is that, they're more seamlessly integrated into the exam, and also for scoring, you can just kind of program it in so those items are not scored, so it's a lot easier to kind of process that data and then see how well those experimental items are doing for use on a future examination, which is what those are usually used for. So before they're actually used to score candidates, they're kind of perfected in that kind of environment so that when you do use them, they're better items. So that's a nice advantage. Easy to create multiple forms. Sometimes, and this is very common, sometimes when you're taking an exam, either you'll have multiple forms and that's the same question, but they might be in different order to reduce cheating, especially if you're in a setting where people are really close to each other, which could be true in a paper and pencil setting or a computer lab. Some people if they do manage a data proctor and look over someone's shoulder, it might be on a different question than they're on. So or in some exams more high-tech ones, sometimes they actually do a parallel exam, which costs a lot of money and time to develop, and it's actually a different exam that's measuring the same thing in a validated way. Having you on the computer is a little more easy to manage, whereas if you do it with a pencil, you have to, have different styles, different forms, different ways of identifying that. On the computer, it's more instantaneous and more easy to control who gets what different form. I think the next bullet is one of the best ones, and one of the ones that a lot of agencies are very, excited about using when they do it, is this immediate scoring. Gone are the days when you have to rely on the Scantron. Your test is done, but you still have to wait a couple of weeks before everything's scanned in. You get the results, and you get a huge list, and it takes a long time. And sometimes the process you really need a lot quicker, especially if you have multiple phases and you certain the path to move on to another phase. Being able to get their scores immediately is a great benefit. So, and of course, you do some human error and Scantron machine error and a whole bunch of other things like Scantrons break down, or sometimes, and the biggest thing, penciling in, like the whole thing, we got trained candidates how to pencil in their things. I can't even count how many times I look at Scantrons where people either don't listen or didn't get it. They circle it, they check it, the marks are all over the place. So this eliminates that whole thing and gets it all automated, which is really nice. The next bullet, so I mean, mostly we are talking about multiple choice tests, but even within that smaller world of multiple choice tests, there is room in the electronic world for more interactive content. An example is I've seen the video-based situational judgment tests where they have candidates watch a small video of an interaction between two, quote-unquote employees that are acting out a certain situation. And once that little video ends, there's 4 options on, the proper thing to do in that situation. And the person, picks that answer and moves on. So it's still a multiple choice test, but it has a component you just could not do in a paper and pencil test. So, there's opportunity to be more inventive and more creative with these. The next one, computer adaptive testing. This is, again, like the GRE or SAT, this is using what we call item response theory. Basically what it means is that candidates can actually take the test, and if they're doing well, they'll get more difficult questions. And they'll keep it more difficult so they get to a certain level where the test could actually end earlier for them if they've kind of proven they have all this knowledge, where if they're not doing well, the questions will actually get a bit easier, and there might be a longer test process for them. So, there's differences, and there's problems with having like the potential for it being looked like it's a different kind of examination, but it's been used and validated in a lot of agencies and a lot of the public sector also, where this is actually, private sector, where this is something that is like the future. It's a very exciting thing, so it's also something that could be used if the rules and regulations allow for that kind of testing at your agency. So it takes a lot of extra items to get that running, so it's a very expensive process to get started, but it's definitely something to consider. Again, the same as for the proctors, check the process, check candidate identification, maintain security, so you have that benefit of still having the proctor taking care of the process. All right. Now for the disadvantages. And luckily, there's a lot less than the advantages. That's good. Again, but this is true for, paper pencil. Usually if you want a place to do it, the added caveat for computers is, computer for everybody if you want to test a lot of people. And then a lot of places might not have that readily available. Mm-hmm. So finding a location, or renting a location, or having that in place. So you might get to test a lot less people than you're used to with paper and pencil. So that could be a disadvantage. One of the biggest things, I don't know necessarily if it's a disadvantage, but it's definitely something that you need to have in place that you don't have to have in place for paper pencils, IT integration. You need to have a technology partner that has developed this thing so it is not just a PDF on the computer that they need to the bubble of the market. It's an actual program that has been programmed in there that is meant to be on the computer so that it actually works appropriately. And having technology in place and having IT available if something goes wrong. Or not if something goes wrong, when something goes wrong, because eventually computers are going to break down, something's going to happen, and having a process in place and having IT support to be able to come there, at least by phone or ideally in person, they'll fix the issue so that the process can go along more smoothly.
Mm-hmm. Right, and the other thing about that technology partner is if you are obviously if you're going through a vendor, a lot of these considerations have been already taken into place, but really the idea of online testing is to mimic the in-person traditional testing. So there's a lot of different considerations when you start testing people online, timing, do they get breaks, all those different things that you have to take into consideration when you're developing. So almost always give you IT help for some of that because there's quite a few things to integrate into this type of system.
Yep. I mean, obviously, with a computer, it's information technology. You're going to need to have that expertise available. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Time for our first poll question. There we go.
Okay, I will read the poll question. So our question for you is, what types of online computer-based testing do you utilize, if any? Please select all that apply.
Okay, and go ahead and start entering in your answers. And we will be tallying up the answers and share the results at the end. Okay, go ahead and for this one you can select all of the answers that apply.
So if you don't use any online, you wouldn't select any, and that would be great. That would be okay. But in terms of online, any types of online tools that you use, and so we've included some proctored and some unproctored options in here to see if any folks are taking advantage of those right now. And so answers are still coming in at a pretty good clip. We'll keep this open for maybe another 10 seconds, give everybody a chance to get your answers in. But just as a teaser, I can tell you that there's a pretty close tie for first place on here.
My exciting.
Can we try to guess?
Mystery and intrigue.
My guess is unproctored training experience.
I'm going to say proctored multiple choice.
Wow.
Okay. And
here we go.
Yeah.
Okay, looks like we've got all of our answers in. Let's close up the poll and share the results. Okay, so I'm going to show this to Ryan. We can talk through those results.
All right, so it looks like Holly won. Holly, proctored multiple choice test 42%, so that is something that they utilize. Unproctored multiple choice, 11%, so there are some of you, exciting, right? Unproctored training experience, 24%. It's good to see that number going down a little bit. Other proctored exams, personality, writing, 40%. Other unproctored exams, 21%. So it still seems most people are still in the proctored world.
Okay, so we will close up that.
Very interesting to see there's some percentage across all of those.
Mm-hmm.
So that's exciting.
It is exciting. Very
So, back to the
presentation.
presentation.
All right, well,
Next slide.
moving right along. So we just have that interesting poll. So I know some of you are doing this, unproctored internet testing. I believe it was like 24%. That was doing unproctored internet testing. So again, this is computer-based testing that's administered via the internet. Again, candidates can take the test on any computer they have internet access to anytime, day or night, in their pajamas, and their Superman t-shirt, whatever they want. You can take the exams. You know, and there's definitely benefits to that. There's also some disadvantages we're going to talk about. But again, usually, unless there's a signed time frame, well, usually there's a time frame when they have to finish it by, but usually there's no other restrictions on time as to when they can log in and take the examination. So again, this is it's very popular in various settings, especially in education, where nowadays online classes are huge, and even some colleges or universities have entire programs that are online based. So having testing come online is a natural component of this, and that's kind of where a lot of this, a lot of the policies I'm talking about today started in the education world. A lot of the advances made in online testing, especially the proctored component of online testing. And again, in this format, students typically provide their own internet resources to take these classes or take these tests that are online. But what we're interested in mostly for here is in employment. And in both the private and public sector, there are components that are being used for online testing. I know in the private sector, where I worked briefly, especially for retail companies, they do a lot of online, unproctored testing. Most of it's personality-based or integrity-based. Like, would you steal from us, yes or no, kind of question. But yeah, so there's a lot of that out there in the world already. And in public sector, I know I used to work for the state of California. They had a very large presence of online, unproctored training and experience evaluations, which has their pros and cons we're not here to talk about today, but again, a very big presence in that realm. Of course, what we're interested in talking about today is the multiple choice examinations, which, there is a growing segment of the organizations, and I've seen them more in the private sector, but also in the public sector, where they are trying to get multiple choice examinations online. And some of them have done it unproctored, which there are various concerns that we'll talk about soon, which somebody can probably guess some of those concerns might be. And also in licensure and certification, unproctored internet testing is being used in that realm as well. So, just to give kind of like where it's being used. So what are some advantages of unproctored internet testing? And again, now we're focusing on the multiple choice test. So I know there's a bunch of different formats out there, but again, we're talking about that test everybody loves. So one of the advantages, of course, is there's no test administration logistics. No more headaches about renting a room. Is it going to be large enough? How many candidates are going to show up? How many no-shows are you going to have? Did you print enough books? All that stuff you don't have to worry about because it's all online and it's taken care of. This is very tied to that. There's no need to hire, train, or pay proctors. Again, unproctored. No test site availability tied into the administration logistics. You don't have to worry about getting a test site or the cost for that. The only costs you're incurring are what it costs you to put the test online, to maintain it online, and to the staff that administers and evaluates those results. So those are the costs you have. Traditional costs you don't have. Again, no site security issues, because there's no site. No printing or shipping of materials unless, you're printing stuff on your back end for the results, but there's no, candidates aren't printing anything, they're not filling out anything, no Scantrons, everything's electronic, it goes through the internet, and as long as there's no massive data outage, then you should be good, getting all the information back. Again, all the advantages of the computer-based testing apply for unproctored internet testing, because it is a computer-based test. And the last bullet, I think, is probably one of the most important, and actually one of the most positive for this section, is that it actually promotes a positive image of the organization, which is pretty important, especially with the younger generation that's very computer savvy, grown up with computers, grown up with iPads. I know my 6-year-old son can already outdo me in all the Kindle and iPad stuff. So I mean, coming up, being able to promote that your organization is with the times, or able to adapt to this new environment is going to be probably pretty attractive to people looking for jobs. So if their first view of your organization is a nice polished online examination that they don't need to go to a site and they can take at their own leisure, and it's probably look pretty good. And that's a very good advantage. Disadvantages. Well, there are some very real, I think, very large disadvantages of unproctored internet testing. The first, availability of technology outside sources. So I mean, you do have to have, we talked about this already, that usually you might use a vendor or you might do internal, but you need to have that IT component. And it's critical because especially if you're doing a multiple choice test and it's unproctored, if it goes down while somebody's in the middle of taking the test, what do you do? If it goes down, I mean, you got to have things in place because when your technology fails, you need to know what to do, who to call, or what's going to happen. So you need to. So I mean, that's a disadvantage because technology is great until it's not. And you have to have a response. So I think the last two are really the biggest disadvantages because the technology you can work around, have persons to call and get it fixed and up and running, but having no proctors to ensure standardization, test security, and identification. I mean, for certain type of tests, it might be a non-issue or less of an issue with a personality test or a training experience evaluation, but for a multiple choice written test, the whole idea is, does a candidate, compared to another candidate, have this knowledge? If you have no proctors to ensure that people are experiencing the same thing or not, cheating or taking pictures of the test or having your uncle or aunt over their shoulder telling them the right answer, you don't even know who's taking the test half the time. If it's not it's truly unproctored and there's nothing controlling the process, you really need to understand that there are some really real disadvantages with this. The way some people get around it or have a confirmatory test on the other end or some kind of process in place to try and make sure this person is the same person, but really unadvisable to really just use the scores as is without some kind of process on the other end to really get a right answer when you don't deserve it. So really those are some pretty big disadvantages of unproctored internet testing, especially as they relate to a multiple choice test where you really expect somebody to have that knowledge and not get it from other sources. Okay, and with that, we're going to turn over to our resident expert on remote proctoring.
Yes, so we're going to talk about remote proctoring now, which is exciting because we sort of see remote proctoring as really kind of the in-between, between our traditional, in-person proctoring and then our unproctored internet testing. So there's an option for remote proctoring, which is internet-based testing that uses technology to monitor the candidate's identity, to maintain test security, and to oversee and really run the whole test administration. The remote proctor can take over the candidate's computer remotely, even disconnecting the candidate from test material if that's ever necessary. For some sort of large security breach, for example, the proctor has full control over the administration. The monitoring of the candidate is implemented automatically, so the candidate is monitored from the point of logging in and the authentication process where the proctor is checking IDs and making sure that the person is set to go. That happens at the beginning of the session all the way through the end of the session. The proctor, an interesting note is that the proctor can even monitor the candidate if there were, for example, delays in the administration. For example, if the proctor needed to help troubleshoot an issue, the candidate is still being monitored that whole time. The administration can result, and usually does result, in a video recording of the candidate's administration, and that's to maintain for records can be used in the event of an appeal. So it can vary how long that video recording is maintained, but it does result in a video recording typically of the administration, which is a new consideration with test administration. And there's options for how detailed the proctor oversight is. So from the number of candidates that remote proctor may be monitoring at one time to whether the candidate is actually monitored in real time, or if there's a session that's recorded and reviewed later, for example. So there are different options with the way that folks are monitored remotely. Okay, please go down. All right, so for automated monitoring, that can include things like keystroke analytics that measure the candidate's computer usage via their individual keystroke patterns and their typing styles. That's to detect if something has changed during the administration. For example, when a candidate registers for a test, all the way through taking the test, just watching for those keystroke styles, make sure those stay consistent. It also includes, the monitoring of the candidates is with the intention for watching for behavior with an emphasis on any of the prohibited behaviors that we would expect the candidate to stay away from. So something that might be a red flag behavior would be looking away from the computer a lot. You know, if the candidate seems to be looking to a different part of the room, talking to someone who is in the area. Something, you know, appears to have attention given to something other than that test, then that would be, you know, getting out of the seat. Those would be things that would be red flag behaviors that are typically monitored by the remote proctor. The record or review option produces a video of the candidate session. We talked a little bit about that in the last slide. That can be reviewed later. And so this administration is not necessarily viewed in real time. And this process can actually include, the review and record process can actually include like a subset of videos that are recorded, like randomly selected and viewed later. So this option is really, in comparison to something like a live administration that's being overseen in live time. So of course the candidates are provided the same rules as the subset at the beginning of the administration. But the proctor may not, depending on the option that's chosen, the proctor may not always be watching in real time to make sure that the rules are being followed at every point in the administration. Okay, so to provide some details on how live proctoring works, the proctor will first launch the session via the webcams and speakers. The proctor provides basic information about the administration. As Ryan mentioned, checks the candidate's identity, typically by checking his or her ID, and typically that requires the candidate to hold up. I mean, obviously they're on the webcam at that point, and they're asked to hold up their identification to the webcam so that the proctor can check that identification against the person who's actually there in the webcam taking the exam. Some vendors require that the candidate complete an e-signature, which is an electronic signature that's unique to each signer and can provide additional security around the candidate's identity. So once the identity is checked and the candidate's ready to go, the proctor then does a security scan of the room and the surrounding areas, and that is done by the candidate asking the candidate to pick up their laptop with their webcam and actually scan the room. So this will include scanning under the desk and anything in the lower part of the room. Sometimes I've seen the proctor do where they do like the bottom half of the room first, and then they scan the top half of the room. They'll check typically walls to make sure that nothing is posted or written on whiteboards or chalkboards that shouldn't be there. Anything that would cause concern for a candidate who shouldn't have access to outside materials. So I've definitely seen proctors who've requested that whiteboards be erased. They want to make sure that there's no computer equipment nearby that the candidate could be accessing or viewing, that there's no papers or files nearby, phones and other personal belongings are moved outside the candidate's reach, and are just really generally scanning for anything at that point in that proctored environment, that remote proctored environment, that would cause any kind of security concerns. So once the candidate gets started with the test, the proctor then turns himself or herself to silent, and the candidate proceeds to work through the test. like any other kind of online exam. But depending on your level of proctoring, this is when the proctor would continue to monitor the candidate for any kind of outlying behaviors, anything that is outside of the rules that the candidate has been given for the administration. And also to note, which this may seem obvious, but an interesting or important consideration is that the candidate and the proctor can at any time access, the microphone, and the candidate is at that point working pretty independently through the exam. But if the candidate has a question or the proctor wants to clarify something or wants to stop the administration and ask any questions, they can at any time check in with one another. So typically they're working through the exam, but at any time they can be asked to check on something, or hey, that was a noise. Can you tell me what happened? Can you show me the doorway? Anytime they need to do that, they can.
Is it a bit of a limit to the amount of people that the proctor can look at that time?
Typically, yeah, and it will depend on the option chosen for remote proctoring and even different vendors. So if you are looking into vendors or looking into that option, then yeah, that's always an important question is, how many folks, is it one person being monitored at a time, is it multiple people? So yeah, that can definitely vary with your remote proctoring agreement. Okay, so in terms of requirements, the candidate must have a computer with the appropriate internet speed, and they also must have the working webcam and speaker system. This is usually not a problem, but we have seen test sessions that had to get canceled or rescheduled because the candidates didn't have the adequate hardware or software. It's always best to let candidates know beforehand what's going to be expected of them in terms of their equipment. Because it's pretty disappointing to get somebody all the way through or trying to get them online, even through the registration process, getting all set up, and then not being able to actually take that test because they don't have the right skills in place. So as much as we can, we do encourage all of that testing and communication up front. And the candidate might also need to install a program to have the remote proctor system running if it's not web-based. So again, good information for the candidate to know up front before the test. We'll talk about the advantages of remote proctoring. There's lots of advantages to remote proctoring. Some of these are going to be shared with the other types of online testing, of course, because it's still online testing. But the first one listed is really one of the biggest advantages, and that's the ability to reach candidates in remote areas. So these are the candidates that you may have never had any chance to reach otherwise. If there's a requirement for them to travel to a specific test site at a specific day and time, and these are folks that you may have never known were out in your candidate pool. And then similar to Ryan's list that he reviewed earlier in the webinar, again, immediate scoring results are available as soon as the candidate's completed and submitted the test. That is always one of the biggest perks that we see with clients to any kind of computerized testing. Huge advantage. The potential to add multimedia like videos and simulations to the test content. There's the potential to implement the computer adaptive testing, like what Ryan talked about, where the content is adjusted based on candidate's performance level. Again, it can promote a technologically savvy image for the agency or department, because again, you're providing options that may have not always been options in the past through the use of technology. So that is typically seen by candidates as something that is a technologically forward-thinking type of agency. As Ryan talked about, it's easy to replace content in the test because it's online, it's electronic, so you don't need to worry about reformatting, printing, and redistributing hard copies of textbooks when you can replace an online electronic copy of the test that is done basically instantaneously. And it's easy to track and add experimental items, and this is typically done for like pilot testing content, like Ryan talked about a little bit, looking at those items and how they're performing by adding those into your system and easily taking them out when you're ready. Also tracking the scoring of those and the replacement of those. Okay, so some more pros to remote proctoring. There are no test administration site rental logistics. There's no parking concerns for candidates in terms of, is there enough parking, is there enough room for everyone, or any of the other logistics that come with having a test site. Similar to our last bullet, or last slide, the administration is not limited only to the candidates who can make it to the in-person administration. It really is opened up to anybody who might need to access that test remotely. In theory, candidates can test 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So an agency may want to put time constraints on the available administration times, totally fine and acceptable. But in theory, that test can be available to the candidate any day or time. So it's so flexible in terms of scheduling. And another big one is that there's a live person who is there via remotely to check the candidate's identity and to control those red flag behaviors and any indications of cheating to the extent possible. So of course, different from in-person proctoring, we're doing this remotely via the webcam and speakers, but definitely a huge advantage over unproctored internet testing where you just don't have any of those controls. We basically allow that candidate to work on the honor system. Okay, so in terms of some of the disadvantages, again, the candidate is required to have even more equipment available with the webcam and speaker requirements. Typically, that's not a problem, but it is, it is something that we do have to have all candidates have that availability through their computer to take use of this technology. There's better control of the testing environment, but again, not complete control. And this can vary, again, based on what type of remote proctoring agreement that you have. Whether the candidates are being proctored one at a time, if it's being recorded live, where a proctor maybe have the opportunity to stop the administration and say, okay, can you scan the room again, versus a record and review later where you don't have that opportunity, you have that video to review, but you might not have the opportunity to stop and kind of control the testing environment the way you would with the live proctor. The candidate's identity is checked, but since the proctor is not in the room and isn't physically present, there's still a chance that candidate's identity could be incorrect. So that's always one of the things that we have to take into consideration. And then monitoring of the candidate's behavior is put into place to control that, but it's not 100% guarantee that no one will try to cheat. In fact, with remote proctoring, it is a new form of testing, and candidates know that there's no one in the room to monitor them. So typically we recommend being really aware and cognizant of the different types of ways that candidates may think of to start, cheating. So we may think we've got things controlled with our list of behaviors and our list of requirements. But again, it's a new type of administration, so even more important to stay on top of all the different ways that that candidates could get creative with the different ways of cheating from a remote location. Okay, so we have our second poll question, and I'll read this one. Let's see, we've got a little bit covered. So what is your biggest obstacle to implementing remote proctoring? So please choose one. And our options are cost, the staff or knowledge to oversee it, security and candidate concerns, buy-in from the organization, or any kind of agency rules or policies that would not allow you to use this type of testing.
Okay, answers are rolling right in. I'm seeing a pretty strong leader so far.
Do you want to take a guess, Ryan?
I would say it's a good question. I don't want to be wrong. Security candidate concerns.
We'll find out in just the next few seconds.
Cost, possibly.
Cost.
Mm-hmm.
Good one.
Well, it looks like we have all of our results, so I'm going to close the poll now and share the results. And, okay, let me... I'm sorry?
Do you want to resume?
Okay. Actually, I've got Okay. So our leader was security and candidate concerns. With 46%. Coming in second was cost to administer at 23%. The next one down was staff or knowledge to oversee the process. And that one was at 17%. Next was policies and or agency rules with 9%, and bringing it up in the rear with buy-in from the organization at only 5%.
Okay.
And so,
Interesting.
there we go. Security was the biggest concern with this.
So security is followed by cost,
Yes.
and then staff knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll type that. And back to the presentation.
Okay, well, we have a couple more slides here, and then looking at the time, because I know we wanted to try to save a little bit of time for some questions.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of considerations, the things to think about, the first is cost. So as with any service, the cost of using an online platform has to be weighed with the cost for current administration methods. Typically those are in-person traditional proctoring. Those can be very costly too, so it's important to look at the costs associated with different types of testing that's available. So for example, with remote proctoring, there's often a cost to administer the test via an online platform, but then there may be an additional cost on top of that for having the test proctored remotely, which could have two different levels of cost. So sometimes the combination of these costs are equal to or less than an in-person administration, because that in-person administration still requires hiring and paying proctoring staff, site rental fees. So it really is something to look at in a way in terms of how those costs look next to each other. We included the communication with candidates bullet second because it's a really important point, and one that I think until you go through this process can be underestimated. So with traditional in-person proctoring, we sort of take for granted that everyone knows how that works. The candidates show up, you register in the front, you sit down, you get your test book. Almost everybody's been through that type of testing. But when you start testing online, and especially moving to the remote proctoring field, candidates need a lot more information up front about the testing process. There's usually a requirement to register for the test online. Typically, we recommend by a certain date, using new sites, new procedures. Candidates, we recommend having them acknowledge that there's different privacy considerations. For example, that there would be a video recorded session. If that is the case in your administration, letting them know up front that this is going to result in a video recorded session of your administration. It's nice to let people know that, so it's not ever a surprise. They'll need to know again about the hardware and software for the computers, all the requirements. So these are just some points of communication. We also like to recommend letting them know exactly what that proctoring environment is going to be like. It's new for a lot of folks, so it's just good practice to let them know, here's generally what your remote proctoring session will be like. Giving them the basics of the information, and then also, again, if they have any trouble logging in, if they have any technological issues, where do they go to get help with that before they're connected to a proctor, for example? They don't have somebody there in person to help them through that, so they need to know, how to handle those types of situations. For the type of testing, I'm sorry, you know what, did I move this down? Let's see, am I on the right one? Oh, okay, I was on the right one, wasn't I? Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so for the type of testing and the probability of cheating, some tests lend themselves better to remote or unproctored testing. It's really important to know your test and what's going to be best for your candidate group. So, for example, for high-stakes testing, in-person administration may still be the best method for now. Remote proctoring can work depending on the details of the test and the candidate group. So it's important to kind of look at each test and each agency and each candidate group to assess what is going to work best for each one. And then to have a smooth testing process, candidates must also be accepting of the administration. So with unproctored testing, candidates could also have the same concerns with cheating and candidate identity. So there must be a process in place for handling how to, communicate that candidate, as well as how the agency is going to handle that. Typically, like Ryan mentioned, verification testing is put into place, or some other sort of verification process is put into place, so that we can ensure that when people go forward in the process from something like an unproctored internet test or even remote proctoring in some cases, that people are selected, the people that are selected are the ones that are qualified to go forward. Okay, now I'm moving to my last one here. And so for our last slide, a couple more considerations. Mixed mode testing is one that we do talk quite a bit about when folks are looking into this type of testing. We generally don't recommend mixing the different types of administrations. So for example, in-person proctoring with remote proctoring. Because of the standardization concerns that Ryan talked about, the remote proctoring session is very different than an in-person testing session. So for standardization, we do recommend, if at all possible, keeping those administrations the same if you are going to combine the scores on a single list. And to wrap us up, a couple questions to consider if you're starting to consider using an online administration. The first is, what level of automated control and monitoring of the online test administration would need to be in place? And the second question would be, what measures are in place already for an online testing program in your agency? And then what would you need in terms of resources and processes to start to undertake this new type of program?
Okay, so that wraps it up, doesn't it? I think we have just enough time for maybe one question or two.
Sure. We have a couple that have come in.
Yeah. One question was, which online personality assessments are validated and recommended to test for teamwork, leadership, and communication skills? Well, there's a bunch of different options out there. We partner with Hogan Personality Assessments, and they offer a bunch of different personality assessments that get at those very skills you're looking for. They're all unproctored internet testing. Of course, you could proctor it if you wanted to. You could, you get the link and then watch them in a proctored environment. But generally, there's not as much of a concern as having personality tests unproctored.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you want to ask?
Okay. And another question we got is, are test takers allowed to pause the test once it has started? And generally, no. They're not allowed to pause the test. So the candidates can stop stop answering questions, I guess, to ask a question or if there's some clarification needed. But it really is intended to mimic an in-person test. So once they're, for example, if they get 2 hours, once their 2 hours starts to answer those questions, they can pause at any time, but they don't necessarily get to stop the test session or the test timing in order to do that.
Okay, well, that does put us at time. So I want to thank you both for a great presentation. I want to thank everyone who joined us today. Again, we will send an email with a link to the recording. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, bye.